Lois's 3 female colleagues hadn't made it to their first day of work, so she found herself alone in the small, barely heated room. The starkness of the quarters startled her. 12 steel lockers, a table, 4 chairs, and a shower, sink, and toilet stall, none of which worked on account of the cold. Waiting for her in the locker room was a white hard hat with a blue stripe and the name Jensen printed on the brim in block letters. A pair of men's size 6 Red Wing work boots, and clunky plastic protective glasses. In the unheated room, she changed into thermal underwear, a sweatshirt, a down vest, gray and blue striped coveralls she had bought the day before, the boots, plastic protective glasses, and hard hat. She stood in front of the mirror over the sink and burst out laughing. The person in the mirror looked like an auto mechanic, not a mother. Lois held her breath for a few seconds and walked out into the plant, where her first task was to go on a tour. The Forbes Fairlane plant evoked fear in a newcomer. Dominated by 4 cavernous buildings, the fine crusher, the surge, the concentrator, and the pellet plant, the facility sprawled over 2.3 million square feet, as if all 102 floors of New York's Empire State Building, 2.1 million square feet, were spread end to end across the snowy Iron Range. That didn't even include the Thunderbird mine, 2 open pits devouring 8,600 acres, from which spewed the iron ore-rich taconite rock that was mined. The plant operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and consumed 70 megawatts of electricity per hour, about as much as the neighboring cities of Virginia, Eveleth, and Hibbing combined. The year the women started, the management of Eveleth Mines had ordered Forbes Fairlane's production capacity be expanded from 2.4 million tons of taconite pellets a year to 6 million tons. Everywhere she looked, Lois could see construction crews at work, upgrading and enlarging the facilities. Taconite rocks contain between 20 and 30% iron ore, a foreman explained to her. The taconite was blasted out of the pit, as everyone called Thunderbird, which was located 9 miles away, on the outskirts of the town of Eveleth. There, the boulders were loaded into trucks and brought to the pit's primary crusher, where they were broken down to the size of footballs. A long line of railroad freight cars transported the rocks from the pit to the plant. The taconite was then carried by conveyor belt to the fine crusher, the first stop in a long pulverizing process, where the rocks were ground into taconite gravel. The crusher was outfitted with 80-foot-high rock-crushing machines and a dizzying maze of conveyor belts. Before she could even take in the scene, Lois was gagging from the black dust that filled the air, like thick smoke in a crowded bar. She could barely distinguish one thunderous machine from another as she struggled to adjust her eyes to the haze. Sticky dust coated her exposed skin and hair, suffocating her. Even more disorienting was the noise. The crusher spoke in a giant, booming voice, and the constant smashing of the rocks in the teeth of the machines made earplugs mandatory. Because the dust contained cancer-causing silica, the men also wore white paper masks over their mouths. The earplugs and the mask plunged Lois into a kind of isolation she had never experienced in a workplace before. She was grateful for the relative peace of the concentrator, her next stop on the tour, until its foreman, John Mackey, led her up to the building's catwalks. Unaccustomed to the weight of her work boots, Lois could barely lift her legs as she and Mackey climbed higher. The clunky metatarsal guards on top of the boots kept catching as she stepped from one platform to another. Until now she had not known that she was afraid of heights. Skyscrapers in Minneapolis had never bothered her, but now she couldn't bring herself to walk to the edge of the graded catwalk and look straight down 10 stories. The first purpose of the concentrator was to grind the gravel to a sand-like consistency, using rod mills, which were large rolling tubes containing steel rods. Another set of revolving drums filled with magnets then separated the iron-bearing grains of ore, or concentrate, from the waste rock, or tailings. After passing through the crusher and the concentrator, by way of a labyrinth of conveyor belts, the wet concentrate arrived at its final destination, the pellet plant. The dirt here was overwhelming. The air, walls, and floors in the pellet plant were filled and coated with black soot, the consistency of flour. Her every step left a footprint as she walked out of the service elevator on the top floor of the building and gazed down 100 feet at a panorama of revolving steel machines, all lined up in rows like dryers in a monstrous laundromat. These were the huge, round, rotating, balling drums, churning and thundering so powerfully that they made her heart race. The balling drums rolled clockwise all day, shaping wet black concentrate into round, marble-sized pellets. Thousands of black pellets rolled inside the drums on the first floor of the pellet plant. They were then hardened into a 120-foot-long rotating kiln fired at 2,400 degrees. The end product was millions of smooth, heavy, black pellets, containing 65% iron ore, ready to be loaded onto train cars for the 60-mile trip to the Lake Superior ports of Duluth and two harbors. From there, the pellets were loaded onto huge freighters and shipped to steel mills in Chicago, Gary, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. The plant challenged Lois's basic assumptions about a workplace. With no sun and no air, it felt primitive, menacing. The workday would be regulated not by people, but by huge, ferocious machines and literally tons of dirt. The size and might and violence of the place made Lois realize that she would have to toughen up. The job would demand more than physical strength, however, for although her coveralls, boots, hard hat, and protective glasses had effectively de-sexed her, everywhere the four men took her, the miners stopped what they were doing, gathered together in small groups, and stared. She didn't know a man there, yet everyone seemed to know her. In 1975, mining put food on the table for 12,300 families on the Mesabi Iron Range and provided the foundation for the economy of all of northern Minnesota. Minnesotans call the thin, ore-rich seam that stretches 110 miles long and 1 to 4 miles wide from Grand Rapids in the west to Babbitt in the east, the Range. The region amounts to less than 2% of the land mass of Minnesota, yet it is the largest iron ore deposit in the world. For the past century, it has produced 30% of the world's and 2/3 of America's iron ore. Blasted in furnaces into steel, the ore and taconite from the Mesabi's tiny strip of land has provided the raw material that built post-industrial America. Its buildings and bridges, its railroads, cars, and military arsenal. Rangers, as they call themselves, pride themselves on working hard, drinking hard, and surviving hard times at the hands of the mine owners. They were used to fighting for themselves. Strikes were their way to better wages and work safety. In 1975, the heavily unionized mines provided some of the highest-paying blue-collar jobs in America. Wages at Eveleth started at $5 an hour. The minimum wage was then $1.80 an hour, and included good health care and retirement benefits. But because this good life was threatened by layoffs, or worse, by permanent cutbacks, the miners lived with an ingrained sense of job insecurity, hostile to any force that might displace them. Up until the mid-70s, the women on the range who needed or wanted to work were store clerks, teachers, bank tellers, secretaries, and waitresses. Few of these jobs came with health care coverage or above minimum wage salaries. But in April of 1974, 9 of the country's largest steel companies signed a consent decree with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the Labor Department. The settlement forced the steel companies to hand over a historic $30 million.
To keep listening to this audiobook, I've left you a link in the description so you can do it, at no cost thanks to Audible's 30-day free trial.